Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear brothers and sisters, and welcome back to the Islamic Shahada channel. She was born as Emily Siobhan Myriam François in December 1982 in the heart of Camden, London, a city known for its cultural collisions and creative chaos. From an early age, Emily's life was surrounded by books, debate, and diverse influences. Her mother came from an Irish Catholic background, and her father was French. This unique blend of Irish intensity and French intellectualism would shape the core of her identity: curious, questioning, and profoundly reflective. Most people first came to know her not through politics or philosophy, but through the big screen. As a child actress, she gained international attention at just 12 years old for her role as Margaret Dashwood in the Oscar-winning adaptation of Sense and Sensibility, 1995, directed by Ang Lee and written by Emma Thompson. In that film, Emily stood beside Hollywood legends Kate Winslet, Hugh Grant, and Alan Rickman. The film was a commercial success, and so was she. But even then, fame wasn't her goal. Acting was simply an experience, a chapter in a much larger book she was still learning how to write. While many expected her to continue in the glamorous world of cinema, Emily was quietly drawn to something else: meaning. She often described herself as a child with too many questions and a restlessness for truth. The spotlight never satisfied her hunger for deeper understanding. Her early life unfolded at the intersection of art and intellect. As she grew older, her passion for thinking led her away from the screen and into the academic halls of the University of Cambridge, where she studied philosophy. It was here that her life began to take an unexpected and transformative turn. Behind the public image of a promising British actress was a young woman engaged in one of the most profound inner journeys of the modern age, a journey that would eventually lead her to convert to Islam. At the time, no one could have predicted that this English-Irish-French girl, raised in a largely secular liberal environment, would one day become one of the most articulate voices on Islam in the West, a British convert to Islam who would challenge stereotypes, inspire thousands, and open new doors of dialogue between worlds often misunderstood. The story of Emily François is not just about faith or fame. It is about transformation. It is about a young woman who stepped away from celebrity, walked through the corridors of doubt, and emerged with conviction. Her name is now known as Myriam François, and this is where her journey truly begins. While her childhood was filled with creativity and culture, Myriam François, then still known as Emily François, grew up with a quietly burning intellectual hunger. Raised in a secular home shaped by Irish Catholic heritage, she was introduced early on to questions of faith, morality, and meaning. But hers was not a faith accepted blindly. Even as a child, she was skeptical of religious institutions. She described herself as someone who believed in God, but often questioned the systems built in His name. This cautious belief didn't come from rebellion. It came from reflection. Emily was a thinker, not a follower. The rituals of religion didn't impress her as much as the ideas behind them. She was drawn to the why behind every practice, the how behind every belief. As a teenager, she would sit for hours reading, questioning, and debating. For her, faith had to make sense, not just spiritually, but intellectually. Her growing fascination with meaning led her into the world of philosophy. She immersed herself in the writings of Immanuel Kant, David Hume, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Aristotle. These were not just school assignments. They were mirrors into her own soul. She searched through their arguments for something stable, something universally true. What is morality? What is truth? What does it mean to live a good life? These weren't abstract concepts for Emily. They were essential, even urgent. This intellectual journey became more focused when she was accepted to the University of Cambridge, one of the world's most prestigious academic institutions, to study philosophy. At Cambridge, she found herself surrounded by some of the sharpest minds of her generation. It was here that her critical thinking sharpened, and her belief system was both challenged and refined. The lectures on metaphysics and ethics fascinated her, but they also left her with a gnawing emptiness. The questions were big, but the answers often felt cold, impersonal, or incomplete. Though Emily never considered herself an atheist, she felt disconnected from organized religion. Christianity, as she had encountered it, seemed tied to institutions she couldn't relate to, buildings, hierarchies, and doctrines she felt had drifted far from their original spiritual roots. And yet, she never gave up her belief in the existence of God. That belief remained quiet but persistent, like a seed waiting for the right conditions to grow. She once reflected that during these years, she was spiritually restless, intellectually dissatisfied. The more she studied, the more she realized that philosophy could ask all the right questions, but struggled to offer answers with real weight. For Emily, moral relativism wasn't enough. She needed a moral compass rooted in something bigger than opinion, something transcendent. And so, while the world still remembered her as a gifted young actress, Myriam François was quietly transforming. The stage lights had faded, the red carpets were behind her. What lay ahead was far more profound, a spiritual and intellectual awakening that would ultimately lead her to convert to Islam. At that time, she didn't know it, but the search she began in the libraries of Cambridge would end with a revelation found in a book over 1,400 years old, the Qur'an. It all began with a simple conversation, not a debate, not an argument, just a discussion between friends. Myriam François, then a young intellectual fresh out of Cambridge, found herself in a candid dialogue with a practicing Muslim. The topic? God, existence, morality. Things she had wrestled with for years. Things that seemed abstract in her philosophy seminars, but suddenly felt startlingly real. Her friend didn't speak like a preacher or an ideologue. He spoke with calm logic, drawing from Islamic thought in a way that mirrored the analytical frameworks she had admired in Kant or Hume. Intrigued, and admittedly a little provoked, Myriam decided to dig deeper, not to be convinced, but to refute. She would read the Qur'an, not for inspiration, but for ammunition. This, she thought, would be an intellectual exercise, a challenge, a test. But the Qur'an had other plans. From the very first chapter, Surah al-Fatiha, something shifted. It wasn't the mysticism she expected. It wasn't irrational dogma. Instead, it was clear, poetic, and profoundly universal. Guide us to the straight path, the verse echoed in her mind. It didn't demand blind allegiance. It invited reflection. It posed a question she had been silently asking for years. What is the straight path? What began as a skeptical reading quickly morphed into something else entirely. As she moved through the verses, Myriam found herself encountering the kind of layered, philosophical reasoning she had spent years studying. The moral clarity of Aristotle, the transcendental introspection of Kant, the existential urgency of Sartre, it was all there, woven into the divine text in a way no human author could quite replicate. It didn't just speak to her intellect, it stirred her soul. The Qur'an didn't just challenge her, it conversed with her. Each verse responded to questions she hadn't yet voiced, filling the gaps left by institutional religion. It rejected injustice. It demanded responsibility. It honored reason. And above all, it affirmed something she had long suspected, that faith and intellect are not enemies. They are allies. In those nights spent reading and questioning, Myriam François was no longer trying to disprove the Qur'an. She was searching through it. What had started as an intellectual critique slowly unfolded into a deeply personal journey, a search for truth, for coherence, for God. This was the moment the seed of transformation took root, not because she was persuaded, but because she was awakened. And for the first time in her life, she considered something she had once dismissed entirely. What if Islam is true? For Myriam François, embracing Islam wasn't an act of emotional desperation. It wasn't born out of crisis or heartbreak. It was, above all, an intellectual conclusion. a step taken not in the dark, but in the light of clarity. After years of studying Western philosophy, grappling with moral relativism, and questioning the limits of institutional religion, she found in Islam what she had been seeking all along: coherence, purpose, and inner peace. In 2003, at the age of 21, just after graduating from the University of Cambridge, she took the Shahada, the declaration of faith in Islam. It was a moment both quiet and monumental, a simple testimony that marked the end of one journey and the beginning of another. She wasn't abandoning reason, but fulfilling it. She wasn't running away from Western thought, but extending it beyond its material limitations. With that decision, she chose to rename herself Myriam, a name that carried with it spiritual resonance, historical depth, and a symbolic break from the identity she had outgrown. It wasn't a rejection of who she had been, but a conscious step toward who she was becoming. Her conversion didn't feel like betrayal. It wasn't rebellion. Rather, it felt like homecoming. In a world that often pits Islam against the West, Myriam refused to accept the dichotomy. She didn't view her faith as a departure from intellectual tradition, but as a continuation of it. Islam, in her eyes, didn't stand in contrast to reason. It invited it. It demanded it. Becoming Muslim was not a negation of her past, but the culmination of it. And in that moment, Myriam François didn't feel torn between worlds. She felt whole. Taking the Shahada was only the beginning. For Myriam François, the journey that followed proved even more complex and challenging. Like many who convert to Islam, she soon discovered that faith was not merely about belief, it was about belonging. And belonging, as she quickly learned, was far more complicated than conviction. She found herself navigating a Muslim community rich in diversity, yet often marked by dogmatism and rigid cultural expectations. As a white Muslim woman from a secular Western background, she frequently felt like an outsider, caught between cultures, and sometimes even questioned for not looking Muslim enough. The Qur'an had drawn her in with its universality, its deep moral clarity. But in some corners of the Muslim world she encountered, that universalism was replaced by exclusivity. The essence of Islam, justice, humility, compassion, was too often overshadowed by an overemphasis on external symbols and social conformity. One of the most public and personal parts of her journey was the hijab. At first, she wore it as an expression of solidarity, a visible connection to her new spiritual path. But over time, it became something else, a focal point for assumptions, projections, and silent judgment. People saw the cloth, not the person. For Myriam, the act of wearing, and later choosing to remove, the hijab became a powerful reflection on social control, gender expectations, and the burden placed on visible Muslim women. Her decision to stop wearing the hijab wasn't a rejection of Islam, but a challenge to a community that too often confuses modesty with uniformity. She remained deeply Muslim, yet critical of the ways in which culture and religion are frequently conflated. She spoke out against narrow interpretations of piety that excluded nuance, individuality, and intellectual freedom. More than once, she found herself asking, "Where is the Muslim home for someone like me?" A woman who converted to Islam not through tradition, but through thought, not through community, but through conviction. And while the answers weren't always clear, her honesty in asking the questions became part of her dawah, a call to a more inclusive, thoughtful, and principled Islam. An Islam rooted in the Qur'an, but aware of the complexities of the modern world. Not all conversions are private affairs. For Myriam François, faith and intellect naturally spilled into the public sphere. In the years following her conversion, she emerged as a compelling voice in Western media, articulate, analytical, and unafraid to challenge prevailing narratives. Whether on the BBC, Al Jazeera, or Middle East Eye, Myriam brought a rare combination of academic depth and lived experience. She didn't just speak about Islam, she embodied its complexity in a Western context. Her journalism centered on some of the most pressing and misunderstood issues of our time: Islamophobia, Muslim women's agency, and the future of interfaith relations. She pushed back against reductionist portrayals of Muslims as either victims or extremists. Instead, she advocated for a discourse grounded in nuance, where Muslims could be thinkers, critics, feminists, and believers all at once. Refusing to be boxed into the role of a token convert or spokesperson, Myriam created her own platform, The Tea with Myriam François, a YouTube channel that blends sharp commentary with open dialogue. The show became a space where difficult questions could be explored without fear, where religion, politics, and identity intersected candidly and respectfully. Beyond commentary, she turned to filmmaking. In her acclaimed documentary, Finding Aisha, she explored the disappearance of a Muslim girl and the broader societal questions it raised about gender, belonging, and vulnerability. It wasn't just a film, it was an act of cultural excavation, demanding accountability and empathy from all sides. At the heart of Myriam's public work lies a deeper mission: to normalize an Islam that is intellectually vibrant, ethically grounded, and socially engaged. She champions a version of Islam that speaks to the Western soul without compromising its essence, one that embraces doubt, invites debate, and rejects both Islamophobia and authoritarianism. In a media landscape often hostile to Muslim voices, Myriam François stood out, not just for being Muslim, but for the way she was Muslim: critically engaged, deeply spiritual, and unflinchingly honest. What does it mean to be Muslim beyond the rituals? For Myriam François, the answer was never just about prayer or fasting. It was about ethics, reason, and the search for universal truth. Islam, to her, emerged not merely as a religion, but as a philosophical framework, a moral compass in a world that often feels morally adrift. Through Islamic principles, she found a structure for objective morality, something beyond cultural trends or personal preferences. It gave her a language for justice, compassion, responsibility, and integrity, concepts she had long wrestled with in philosophy classrooms, now anchored in spiritual meaning. Contrary to the stereotype that conversion requires shedding one's past, Myriam insists that embracing Islam was not a rejection of her identity, but a refinement of it. It did not erase her intellectual roots or cultural heritage. It added depth to them. It was not an act of subtraction, but of integration, a reconciliation of heart, mind, and soul. In the Qur'an, she found a profound affirmation of universal good, a recognition that morality is not confined to any one religion or people. Islam acknowledges the presence of virtue in all corners of humanity, and Myriam found peace in that inclusive vision. Being Muslim did not mean seeing the world in binaries. It meant being guided by principles that transcend tribe, race, or creed. Her understanding of Islam is deeply spiritual yet intellectual, a space where critical inquiry and sacred tradition coexist, where you don't suspend your intellect to believe, but rather believe because your intellect leads you there. For Myriam, Islam is not about conformity. It's about transformation, from the inside out. It's about cultivating the self, challenging ego, and striving for goodness not because it's easy, but because it's right. To be a woman, a Muslim, and a public intellectual in the West is to walk a tightrope, balancing visibility with vulnerability, tradition with transformation. For Myriam François, these three identities do not pull her apart. They define her wholeness. In the Western public eye, Muslim women are too often framed in extremes, either submissive victims or rebels against their faith. Myriam challenges this dichotomy. Her version of Islamic feminism is neither apologetic nor imitative. She doesn't seek to mimic Western models of liberation, but instead insists Muslim women can be autonomous within their own moral and spiritual frameworks. She envisions an Islam that embraces female intellect and agency, one that doesn't demand a choice between faith and freedom. Her work proposes a woman-friendly Islam, not a diluted faith, but a deeper, more reflective engagement with the sources of tradition. Myriam's intellectual voice cuts through simplistic narratives. In academic conferences, in political commentary, and on television panels, she reclaims the right to interpret Islam as a thinking believer, a woman unafraid to challenge both secular assumptions and internal stagnation within the Muslim world. To her, the veil is not the symbol of her worth, her voice is. And through that voice, she expands what it means to be a Muslim woman in the West. Not a contradiction, but a possibility. Not a paradox, but a platform. She doesn't just speak about Islam. She speaks through it, with conviction, complexity, and clarity. In the intersection of womanhood, faith, and thought, Myriam François is not merely surviving. She is redefining the space. As of 2025, Myriam François stands as a prominent intellectual, writer, and documentary producer whose voice resonates across global platforms. Far from the child actress who once captured hearts on the silver screen, she has carved a unique path that blends rigorous thought with heartfelt spirituality. Her work now spans articles for major international media outlets, insightful podcasts, and a popular educational YouTube channel, where she engages audiences on topics ranging from Islamophobia to secularism, minority integration, and the role of spirituality in the modern world. In a time when the discourse surrounding Islam often remains polarized, Myriam's perspective is both nuanced and urgently needed. She brings clarity to complex issues, reminding her audience that faith and reason need not be at odds. Her contributions highlight the challenges faced by Muslim minorities in Western societies, advocating for dialogue, understanding, and inclusivity. Despite the pressures of public life and the demands of a fast-paced media landscape, Myriam remains deeply committed to her spiritual and intellectual journey. Her steadfast dedication to exploring and embodying the principles of Islam continues to inspire many, especially those navigating the intersections of identity, faith, and culture. In 2025, Myriam François is not just a voice among many. She is a beacon for thoughtful engagement with Islam in the West, a reminder that belief, inquiry, and activism can coexist harmoniously. As the night falls over the quiet streets of London, Myriam François walks alone, not hurried, but purposeful. The city lights cast long shadows, echoing the journey she has taken from childhood star to thoughtful Muslim intellectual. Her story is far from finished. It is a continuous path, one marked by questions, reflections, and a deepening faith. In her own words, "I didn't convert to escape anything. I embraced Islam because it answered the questions I had asked all my life, not just what is truth, but how should we live?" This is not the story of an arrival, but of an ongoing journey, one that invites each of us to seek meaning beyond the surface, to reconcile reason with belief, and to live with integrity in an ever-changing world. For Myriam, Islam is not a destination, but a compass, a way of navigating life's complexities with grace, courage, and hope. And so, her walk continues. Thanks for watching until the end. I hope it was useful. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.